I've been out here as far back as I can remember with my grandfather. He taught me everything that I know with regards to fishing in general. And back then, he told me when they used to harvest the tuna during the tuna heke season, there were fires lit up on both sides of the mouth, and it was a firelight that would attract tuna. And trenches were dug, and on each swell that came in, they would push the tuna into the trenches, and everybody would just race down and grab them and wake them out. I've seen it once, because as years went by, with the changes to the habitat further upland of the Ruamahanga, the tuna declined in numbers. So the only time that I saw it was probably one of the last few times that they actually did it, and that would have been back in the early 70s. I would have been 5 years old. 5 or 6 years old. So Whakapapa Kōrero was based around a lot of what my grandfather told me and what a lot of the other older people would tell me as well, and how they would, once the eels were harvested, wouldn't be unusual to see all the fence lines just covered with drying eel, hundreds or thousands of them, further back in town as well, Carterton and Greytown. So it was a big migration of people out here to harvest the tuna, then take it back inland. And being a fisherman all my life as well, I wouldn't only be catching the tuna here in Onokia, but also in a lot of the estuaries and creeks and rivers back further inland as well. And back in the day, all the creeks would absolutely chocker with tuna. I've got links out here. My great-great-great-grandfather was born up the Tuna River, which is only about a 5-minute drive from here. And a lot of stories that were handed down from him as well, down through our line, which, now and again I pass on to my kids as well, my younger boys. Yeah.
When they're ready to migrate, she'll head off into the Ruamahanga River over there and then make her way down to Onoki. Perhaps we're 110 kilometres from Onoki Moana. When the heke was on the migration, they would dig trenches from the side of the lake towards the banks, and then they'd dig a hole at the end of the trench. And so when the lake was expanding, the migrating eels, some of them would follow the trenches when the water started to go down, and then when it was almost gone, the hole at the end would be filled up with eels. They were always careful not to take too many, because the earliest people that had arrived here, it's known and acknowledged that they made some mistakes with some of the things they got up to, and they realised that if they destroyed the area that they were living in or put it under threat, then they weren't going to survive themselves. So that's where they developed some smarter management practices. There'd be particular times when you could fish, and particular places, some might be rested. While you moved on to, like, one stream would be rested for maybe a few years, you move on to another place, and they'd keep a record of it. But up here,
I am the 7th child, and my mother would say that I was the first girl. I had to go with my brothers because they would be the ones that would be babysitting me, and I would have to go out with them eeling. We call it the Ponatei, but it was actually on the Huangaroa River where they would go eeling, and they were just the champions. They were just great at doing what they did. But the river, all of us kids would go there, and we'd always be looking for life, because the coders, they weren't so scary as the eels, but they were fun. That was fun, just all that time, the children and us children being in that stream, researching. We didn't think of it as being science, but it when you think about it, the scientific things that we saw there that are not there now, it's, where's it gone? We never went to Mangakino. It was I know that it was really, really hard for them to accept that their whānau had left here and gone and searched for another home. To the whānau that remained here, it was it meant more work, harder work. This is when the poverty actually started to really eventuate here, because we didn't have the access to the rivers and the lakes like we had in the past. Everything was sort of getting closed off with the, having access to those waterways, to our mahinga kai. If you had a good relationship with the farmers, and that was okay, but if you didn't, you know, your going to get kaimoana was became more restricted into just certain places where you could get it. My father, I don't know, I just feel like, and Mahia would have known it too, because with Mahia and my father and, you know, his family, they were with one with the lake, you know, there was, you couldn't separate them. That was home. The times I can remember going out with my father, that was even duck shooting off that out there, and just seeing the bird life. No, I don't know, I never knew our lake was this like this until maybe 25 years ago. Then I realised, shit, we aren't the pristine, you know, still have the natural waterways with all our native species of fish and all our native birds and all these other exotic birds that come to feed in there. How that disappeared, and like in such a short space of time. And when I was a teenager, I used to watch that lake, and I used to be out there with some of my other whānau that would come and take us out there, and there'll be water skiing. There'll be so much activities going on that on Wairarapa Moana that I don't see that happening anymore. It's like it's too dirty to go and play in now. But I did realise that when I was out there, and I was terrified, and I did fall out, and I was so amazed because I was only up to my waist. And I thought, wow, this is only shallow, this is not deep, this is not scary. But then now I'm thinking that I'd be lucky if it's up to my knee. So I'm just aware of the level of the water, the flow of the water, the colour of the water, and even the smell of that water. This runoff that's going into our lake, a lot of it's sediment, a lot of it's chemical contamination things, and just that it doesn't look well, it doesn't smell well. Even the river, I can smell it.
The river was always part of our lives, and my friends, you know, we swam at the river. We would leave school at lunchtime and go to the river and not come back, you know. It was part of a normal upbringing in the Wairarapa as you are down the river. This is in the sort of 80s, 90s. Yeah, it's just everyday part of life. And my uncle, adopted uncle, Matt Paku, he was the father of my best mate, and he'd take us out to farms eel fishing because he was a commercial eel fisherman, and he did it all around the Wairarapa, so we were sort of lucky enough to travel in the back of the truck on the open tray, discovering little creeks and lakes around the back country of Masterton, and that's when I really deeply fell in love with our rohe, and Matt would employ us for the summer period, and it was a time to hang out with the boys, and Matt would get ready and we'd go lay the nets late at night or in the evening, and then first thing in the morning, so we'd start at 4:35. We'd drive out to where we set those nets, and before the sun rose, we would be in the water floating down a river or a stream. And one time in particular that really changed my life is a place up the Ruamahanga, which is at the foothills of the Tararuas, big boulders, deep pools, and there's a place that's really special. And I remember Matt telling us in the truck on the way out there, we were like yawning and complaining, and he said, "You guys don't know how lucky you are," and I'll always remember that. Getting into wetsuits, freezing cold, you know, the water's cold, and then floating down into a gorge, the Aporo Mahanga Gorge, and it's quite short, but the gorge is part of the remnants of the forests that were north of Masterton, and you know, there's kahikatea, you know, 1,000-year-old kahikatea, you know, scattered along the edge, and then you go into this ravine, and the sun hasn't come up, and you're going into shadow, deep pools, 100% visibility, just as the sun's sort of coming over, and you know, you can imagine. And we'd set the nets the night before. I got the short straw on this occasion. I'll never forget slipping into the water, but it was like, you know, 100% visibility, and that early morning sun coming on the water, and just magical. And we got to sort of halfway through without any eels, and then thinking the last one wouldn't have any eels either, and I swam down, came face to face with a really big tuna, you know, an old lady, a kaumatua, and I was in her world for a second, and we sort of had this moment, you know, and it shaped the rest of my life. That, you know, it was a proper turning point in my young life, and so, you know, that was the beginning of that story. And, you know, now I make them. Yeah.
One of my uncles from up the Wainui River introduced me to this commercial eeling, because we were working at the freezing works then, and in the off season most of my relations from here, a lot of them, went commercially eeling for 2 or 3 months of the year. So at that time there would have been 50 commercial eelers in the Wairarapa. When I started with a friend of mine, we started with 5 nets each, and we catch a ton of eels a week. And at the end of by the time I'd finished, I was running 80 nets to possibly catch 200 or 300 kilos a week. So that just showed you how the eel disappeared with the effort that was going in, and no management around it really. And the short fin, I think, is the one that really got the hammering, because they were in the lakes and you just went in there and they had nowhere to go. At least with the longfin, they had a little bit of run in the rivers and that, but they were so easy to catch. So. The disappointing thing for me this year, and it's the first time I've ever seen, is the shortage of elver coming back. It's the first time I've ever really seen it. It's bad, really, when you think that my people, my dad, my grandparents, my cousins, used to eat the elver. My dad used to always tell me about it. And we've certainly eaten it, and only a couple of times. We brought it home and eaten it. It's beautiful. But the quantities are not there now, Even though we've seen millions of them coming up in the last few years, my dad says when he was a young fella, the rivers were like milk. So no commercial activity, and then the commercial, that stopped all the breeding stock going. So in his time, as he says, it was just like milk running up the Kaiwan, the Whareama, and most of our rivers. The Rumahanga would have been the same, the lake. Wanoki and Wairarapa are very unique to themselves, a bit like some of the lakes down the South Island. There's only one outlet for the whole valley. So with all the obstacles in the way, the diversion and that in the Rumahanga River, and the changing of the waterways from the Anoki into Lake Wairarapa Lake and the top lake, certainly over the years of fishing there, you see the drop in the eels commercially, but I would have said a lot of it would have been the eels not getting back into the lake too. Through all of the flood stuff they done down there, and taking the land for farming and that, and reduced all of the environment. So yeah, we've seen some big changes in the tuna.
I was brought up on that side of the lake, just straight over there, where the mouth of the Rumahanga comes into the lake. My memories of the lake and what we used to do down here involved fishing, a lot of fishing. Because I was the sort of tallest in the family, I was always on the deep end of the dragnet, so that involved a lot of being able to swim, especially if you walked into a hole. Yeah, we sort of fed the whānau and around the area. As to do with our marae and whatnot, there was always a lot of eels, flounders, perch, mullet. We used to get mullet that came up the river, into the mouth of the river. They came in their thousands. And now I believe the way the lake is now, this sort of thing is not going on. The size of the flounders here were horrendous. I don't know if I ever weighed one, but they were at least that big and probably that thick. And these were called lake flounders, and I'm led to believe there's not any left here. This is kahanuni, this is part of us. Ngā tahu kahanuni, there's marae's on the hills all along this lake, overlooking it. We're the guardians. We're not guarding anything, in my eyes. The pH level is so high, it won't sustain the fish that used to be caught here. And it's sad, and I blame it on the government. They take away something as special as this lake and then give it back to us as ruined. It was never like that when they took it, and now look at it. Yeah. Give us something that's broken. Yeah.